Hello my dear YouTuber friends, and I hope you're all keeping well. Welcome to this new video which is all about using Spad.Next to configure different options for your Logitech, in this case multi-panel or switch panel or whatever panels you have. You can configure them to do some interesting things, like my pitch trim. I'm still using this rocker switch for using my trim in my flights. So I didn't really use this trim wheel on the multi-panel, but now I have it set to alter my vertical speed, as you can see. The same with, so I can alter that vertical speed up and down in increments of 100. And as you can see, the aircraft responds. And I've also, using my flaps, I've got a lever for my flaps on my funky 737 replica handles. That's what I use currently. So I'm not using this flap switch on the multi-panel. But I've configured this in Spad.Next to increase and decrease my altitude, which is going to be very useful for a lot of you flying sort of the Airbus A320 in increments of 1000. So down takes it down 1000, up takes it up 1000. It's not straightforward. There's a lot of caveats and difficulties and issues using Spad.Next with Flight Simulator 2020 that I've discovered, but I'm gonna try and talk you through them in this video. Okay, so the first thing you absolutely want to do is go to the Spad.Next.com website. I'll put a link to it in the description below. Go to the download tab and get the most recent version, whichever one that is. So it'll be a zip file, unzip it and then run the program. It will be an exe file. There's quite a lot of setting up to do with Spad.Next, and I'm going to talk about that later in the video. First thing I'll do though is get to the good stuff and show you how to set the trim wheel and flaps button or lever to alter the vertical speed and to alter your alt with the flaps. Okay, so let's start altering our trim wheel on our multi-panel. By default, it's set as it would normally work. It affects our elevator trim up or down, so you can increase elevator trim or decrease it to set your trim in the aircraft. That's by default, of course. I want to set that to alter our vertical speed of the aircraft. So I'm going to delete these two events that are in there. Highlight one of them, delete event, and the other one's highlighted by default, delete event. If I go to the simulator now, this trim wheel will do nothing. Nothing is assigned to it in Spad.Next. But to get the vertical speed assigned to this, a nifty feature here, if you go down to online snippets, left click on that, it will come up with a few options here that you can choose. This should work for you because this came up for me by default. If I click on the top one there and go to the comment, to use the AP autopilot pitch trim wheel to increase and decrease the autopilot vertical speed, that's what we want. So with that top one highlighted, click OK. If it's not the top one, just find this one here with this comment, click OK. As you can see now, the trim wheel will increase and decrease our vertical speed. So nose up, which is actually moving the wheel down. If I move the trim wheel, you'll see that little arrow animation here. And as you can see, it's decreasing my verticals. Sorry, it's increasing. So nose up is increasing my vertical speed. If I nose down, it's decreasing my vertical speed. So let's leave it on 0 there and go back to the simulator. And with the simulator running, I've got autopilot disengaged, I think. So I'm going to engage it on my multi-panel. I'm going to actually show you this, try and show you this actual on my multi-panel as well. So I press record on my phone. I'm going to click on Alt so we get to that 1900 altitude there. You can see my vertical speed. I'm going to use my trim wheel. I'm going to decrease it. And as you can see, it's decreasing my vertical speed by moving it up. So instead of climbing at 500 feet or 700 feet per minute, we're now at 300. If I alter my alt a little bit more, just so we got a bit more wiggle room, if I want to increase that vertical speed, I'll move my wheel down. And as you can see, the simulator reacts to that as well. So I don't want to go to 900 feet per second. 400 is good enough. Now, let's just stop that recording. For me, that's a bit confusing. So I'm moving my wheel up to decrease and moving my wheel down to increase. I want it to go the other way. For me, that's a bit backwards. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to top one. I want to actually have nose up to decrease my vertical speed. I'm going to highlight it. It's highlighted. Edit event. Left click. You'll get this sort of pop-up box here. Highlight the action. So make sure this is highlighted. Left click, and then you can edit action. So instead of it increasing my vertical speed, I want it to decrease. So left click, edit action. Left click in this box here, simulator event, and it will come up with all these different options. So instead of increasing vertical speed, I want it to decrease. So I'm going to choose that one. Click OK, and OK again, and OK again. Now both wheels, moving the wheel in either direction will decrease my vertical speed. That's not what I want. I want to increase by moving my wheel up or nose down on the trim wheel. Sounds a bit complicated, but just try and wrap your head around it. So I'm going to click on this one here. Click on edit event. Same thing I was doing before. Left click on the action to edit the action. Left click in the simulator event to bring up all the options. And I'm going to just mouse down a bit. I want that to increase my vertical speed. So I'm going to click, highlight that. Click OK. OK again. OK again. So as you can see now, that's much better. Moving my wheel up will increase my vertical speed. Moving my wheel down will decrease my vertical speed. I hope that's made sense. If it doesn't, just go and re-watch that last part. Go back to the simulator. I won't show you my mods panel again, but I'm just going to move my wheel down and it all works fine. You can see the simulator reacting. Moving my trim wheel up will increase my vertical speed, as you can see there. So that's all working well. Let's pause that. Go back to Spad.Next, and now we'll move on to the flaps. To have this, it's by flaps by default is to increase and decrease flaps, obviously. We don't want that. We want it to increase our altitude and decrease our altitude by increments of 1000. Okay, so perhaps the most interesting setting for those of you who are watching, especially the sort of airline pilots, the flaps. We're going to delete the flaps up and down. Like before, we're just going to delete the events, highlight them, and delete them. And again, we're going to go to that online snippets with flaps selected. Click on online snippets. And somewhere, I think it's this one here, speed. Before I do that, there's two different things to select here. You've got flaps down and flaps up. Ensure you delete all the events on both flaps up and flaps down. I almost didn't do that. I'll click on flaps down, click on online snippets again. And the options that come up, I believe it's Speedo here. And it'll say there you go. Useful if you have, for flaps, if you have it for flaps, if you have a different setting, like I've got a different lever for my flaps, I don't need that flaps on my multi-panel. It will increase and decrease your alt up and down. In this case, because we've got down selected, it's going to decrease our altitude by 500 feet. Ensure it's selected. Ensure you've got those comments there. Click OK. Instead of it decreasing by 500, I want to decrease my altitude when I click flaps down by 1,000. To do this, just go to Edit Event, left click the action, Edit Action. Now in this perimeter value, instead of 500, type in 1,000. Press OK. You can see that's now altered. So if I click flaps down, it's going to decrease my alt, show you, by 1,000. Now I've not got flaps up configured yet, so I'm going to click on flaps up and do the same thing. Online snippets. Looking for Speedo again, there you go. Alt up by 1,000 feet. This one we don't need to alter. Just ensure that's selected, ensure you got those comments there. Click OK. If I click my flaps up on my multi-panel, there you go. My alts will go up in increments of 1,000. Very handy if you're in an aircraft, if you're in an airliner, you want to get to your assigned 31,000 feet, so let's say. There you go, I did that in seconds. Rather than using this knob on your multi-panel, you can now use your flaps to increase and decrease your altitude by 1,000 feet. Let's go and test this in the simulator. So press resume. I'm just going to grab my telephone and record this to show you. I'm sure a lot of you believe me, but let's just ensure I've got autopilot on. It is. Press record. I'm going to use my flaps up button. There you go. I've increased my altitude now by 1,000 feet. So the autopilot will climb to that. I can decrease that. Let's decrease it to 2,000. And now you can see in the aircraft the autopilot is going nose down. And I want to increase my vertical speed by 500. And I can do that as well. So all's working well. So there's a little bit of tinkering and configuration that you need to do to Spad.Next when you first download it. I've downloaded it, unzipped it, so I'll right click on the program, and you're advised by Spad.Next themselves to run as administrator. So I'll right click and run as administrator. The splash screen will come up, of course. And when you first run it, you'll get this kind of no profile assigned message. Just go with assigned. Whatever just comes up, it should come up with something like your simulator running and the Skyhawk. That will do. Just click on assign there. Something I should have mentioned, have flight simulator running in the background. I've just got a simple flight over London, my usual suspects running at the moment. Let's just make sure that's all nicely trimmed out. I'll come back to that in a moment. I've got that running in the background. I've also got my multi-panel plugged in, and of course my flight yoke and whatever panels you want to configure, have them plugged in and flight simulator running first before you start Spad.Next. When you first run it, you'll get a configuration wizard. So let me quickly run through this with you. It'll ask you to run this when you first run Spad.Next. I've got Spad.Next and the simulator running on the same computer, so if you're doing likewise, just click the first option. If you've got it running on a different computer, click the bottom option. But I'll click the top option and start Wizard. So I'm using a free trial. It will last for 14 days, so it's full trial. Everything's enabled in the trial for 14 days, so you don't need to buy anything. Then you would need to buy it afterwards if it's good for you. It's got the following supported simulations have been found on my computer. Flight Simulator, of course, X-Plane, I've got that installed too, and Euro Truck. I'm concentrating on this video, of course, on Flight Simulator, but it's just showing me what it's found. That's okay. Next step. SimConnect detection. Connect to the simulator running on this computer. If you're running on the same computer as SimConnect, obviously have that enabled. I can test the connection. Comes up as connection successful. That's okay. Next step. I'm not running FUIPC, so I'm disabling that. If you don't run FSUIPC, have that check or tick on disabled FSUIPC. Then we can go to next step. Explain, I'm not bothered about this video. I'm not going to enable explain support, so I'll uncheck that box. Next step. Overview. It's just showing you FSUIPC disabled. I don't have it installed. SimConnect enabled. Just go to apply settings. Next on the next screen and complete Wizard. And that should be you set up. Now what we do want to concentrate upon is the multi-panel. So it's actually the panels tab that I'm most interested in. You got the yoke tab. If you want to set that up, you can choose that, but it's the panel tab I'm interested in. I'm going to left click on it. The device is currently not configured. Do you want to use a default configuration? I'll go yes to that. It'll come up with a few different options. Now I'm going to use the options that nearer to the date of Flight Simulator 2020, which is the third option here. The other options are all early. I'm going to go with the later published option, so it's this one here. And if I click on the various switches here, it shows you what they're set up as in the simulator or in Spad.Next in this configuration. So flaps is set up as flaps. I showed you that earlier in the video that we altered that, and the trim wheel. The autopilot is set up for autopilot master, the autopilot master switch, but there's a couple of problems with this. If I go to the simulator and resume, and I click my autopilot button, it doesn't engage. If I hover over my autopilot master in the cockpit, you can see it's not engaged. I'm clicking my autopilot button, it engages for a second, then turns off again. So that's not good. So let me just make sure we're not crashing. Let's go back to Spad.Next. To get this working, I found on this default configuration, I've got to delete these bottom two events. So I'll highlight them and delete event. Highlight the bottom one, delete event. So I'm just leaving the short mode on and off enabled there, or in the actual Spad.Next configuration. If I go back to Flight Simulator, resume, click on autopilot now, it works. Hover over it, you can see I've engaged my autopilot. So that works fine. If I click it again, it will disengage it. So there you go, that's all working as it should. Let's get out of that. Go back to Spad.Next. I found I've had to do that with a number of these buttons. So my heading button, I'll delete the bottom two events so that the heading button works fine. The Alt button, delete the bottom two events, and that should all work fine in the simulator. So go back, Switch on my autopilot, switch on my alt. I've got an altitude of 1500 set on my auto panel, on my multi-panel. It will climb to that. If I click on my heading, it's going to go now. The autopilot's going to take me on my heading, which is set to 0 degrees on my multi-panel. Let me alter that to 90. You will see it will turn back, and it all works as it should do. So let's press escape. Go back to Spad.Next. So by deleting the bottom 2 buttons on whatever buttons, bottom 2 events on whatever buttons you want to use, that all works fine. And this is now in a state that I showed you previously, where we could alter our pitch trim wheel and our flaps button. So let me now take you to my conclusion. So I think Spad.Next is good. It's not without its issues. I've got autopilot on at the moment. If I deselect autopilot, the autopilot will light up, the button will light up here, but my autopilot in the simulator, if I just mouse over that, is deselected. So the lights seem to be reversed. So if I click on autopilot there, it's now engaged on the simulator. If I click on my alt, let's just increase that by 1000, and click on my alt button, as you can see, it doesn't light up on the panel. Now I'm sure somebody can help me with that in the comments. If you can live without that, this is highly useful. Let's just increase our altitude to 5000 and it will climb. Let's just decrease our vertical speed. I don't want to climb so quickly. And it all responds. I'm loving it. I'm going to reach out to the office of Spad.Next to try and get a copy of this, because there's a lot more configuration I want to do. But listen, let me know your comments below. Are you going to give this a try? I would highly recommend it, especially if you're using airliners with the multi-panel or your switch panel. I've not got a switch panel, but it might be interesting to get one now to see what I can do with it in Spad.Next. Give the video a like if it's been useful. Subscribe for more. Many of these type of videos always will be coming out from myself. And I'll see you soon.